It's loading up. Let me just finish arranging all of my little windows. Come on. Cooperate with me, please. I have a love-hate relationship with the technology. I love what it can do, and I hate what it refuses to do sometimes. You know, like work. Great. All right, so let's go ahead then and share our texts so that we can look at the same thing while working. Make sure that I've got the spotlight. Yay. And let's center that a little bit more so that we are good to go. All right, not too bad. There we go. All right. Good to see everybody again, or for those of you who are watching this on record, good to be seen by you for whenever you have time for your study. Very important to always make a little time to study. And remember, you can always pause these discussions and lectures. Don't feel like you have to do them all in one go. Don't feel like you have to do them all at my original broadcast speed. Speeding up is fine if you know that you can concentrate and focus. And certainly I hesitate and ah a little bit in ways that you might want to skip, and that's okay. You can always rewind if you miss something or want to consider it a little bit more deeply. We are continuing today with our second part of our discussion of Tanakh, biblical texts. That is to say, some things that are taken from the Nevi'im, in particular, that are focused on this end of days discussion. We saw in our first section last time various visions of peace and of plenty and of ultimate security. We also saw hints of conflict, and we're going to pick up with those conflict themes today, and then we will switch into a broader view once again. As always, I don't know entirely how far we're going to get today. It kind of depends upon your questions, comments, or things that I feel need a deeper explanation, depending upon the interaction with the class. But let's go ahead and begin with the prophet Malachi. He was one of the last official prophets. And as you can see, we're going to find in his text a sort of convergence of many of the ideas we've touched on so far, as well as some new ideas. And on the day, Bayom Hahu, remember this phrase keeps coming up again and again and again. We saw it in our liturgy section in the Aleinu, but we also see it throughout the prophetic works, this looking forward to a future day. Now, as we also talked about last time, there is a conundrum anytime we are looking at prophetic texts of trying to decide whether or not the Yom, the day that is being focused on, is a day that is coming soon for the prophet, meaning coming in the lifetime of the prophet or very shortly after their prophecy, and it is that day that their prophecy comes true, or if they are looking long-term. And by long-term, I mean perhaps well past our current time, which for all of the prophets now would be more than 2,250-ish years. So a very long time indeed. We have to tell by context, we have to tell by fulfillment whether or not the prophecy has come true. And as the content is subject to interpretation, that can always lead to debate and discussion. So don't feel that we're always going to come down to this is definitely going to happen or this definitely has happened. I can guarantee for almost all of the prophecies we look at, there is a range of opinions within Jewish tradition, which is okay. Like we talked about at the very beginning, it is overstated how much Judaism doesn't care about what comes next, but it isn't entirely based on nothing. Judaism does definitely focus on understanding our obligations, our role, and the journey that each one of us is living through at this very moment. And what happens next is part of our conception of our journey, but it is not a focal point of our existence. It is not what we use constantly as the whole reason for our existence. There is much to do in this world. We will get back to many more of those lessons of what we do in this world based off what we learn from these teachings as we go through them, but more later on once we have a bigger picture, something like a coherent view of what they're trying to teach. So I'm afraid you're going to just have to wait for the baking to get done. But in the meantime, let's continue to work with our ingredients. And on that day that I am preparing, said God of hosts, they shall be my treasured possession. Just a little aside, because linguistically, I always find that people have trouble with this. God of hosts has nothing to do with hospitality. Host here is using the Old English meaning for tzivaot, which is a army host. The host of the Romans swept across Europe. We're not talking about people who are welcoming you. They are talking about large army groups. You could easily say battalion or a corps, or indeed the word army, which doesn't always mean the totality. It can mean a subgroup, as it does in modern American military nomenclature. When we say God of hosts, we are talking about God being in charge of the entire heavenly army, the heavenly forces. It doesn't have a purely military sense. It has to do with the idea of God being ultimately in charge of all of reality. So with that in mind, God is saying that eventually they, and here the pronoun is referring to the Jewish people, shall be my treasured possession. I will be tender toward them as a man is tender toward a son who ministers to him. Right? Kindness, a metaphor of great gentleness. And you shall come to see the difference between the righteous and the wicked, between those who serve God and those who have not. So this tenderness is apparently going to be focused on those that have been living a good life, that are doing what God has asked of us and living a life that is in accordance with God's wishes. And those that are wicked, well, that's the opposite, people who have not been doing so. Now, what is this going to feel like when it comes down to that difference? For lo, that day is at hand, burning like an oven. All the arrogant and all the doers of evil shall be straw. And the day is coming, said God of hosts, shall burn them to ashes and leave of them neither stock nor bough. All right, so straw is, of course, something that burns very, very readily. It was used as a kindling. If there was straw in the field and there was a fire, it would sweep across the field, stripping it bare in moments. And that's the image that the prophet is going for here, that the wicked and the arrogant will simply be destroyed, and no stock and no bough. Well, as we talked about before, the metaphor of plants, of things growing and of things putting forth stock or new growth is a symbol of surviving difficulty and is a symbol of having this fresh life, this ultimate ability to overcome whatever happened. Well, these people, the arrogant and the evil, they apparently will not have that moment of rejuvenation. They will not have the ability to replenish themselves. Now, does that mean that they are obliterated for all time, body and soul? Well, there are some who have that opinion. Most, however, interpret this to mean that the ways of the arrogant, the ways of the doers of evil will be stripped away, and that nobody will continue in their vein. The same way, speaking as somebody that's Jewish, if everybody who was currently Jewish stopped being Jewish, if we all just walked away from it and never looked back, and nobody ever considered Judaism as part of their identity, as part of their guide of life, I would say that Judaism was dead. Yes, the Jews were not dead because they themselves have gone on to live whatever lives they're choosing. But Judaism, the part that makes us us, that would have neither stock nor bough. So the idea that this can be talking about the erasure of evil by erasing the will to do evil, by erasing the desire to do evil, but still leaving the evildoer alive, now reformed and now doing what is right, is perfectly compatible with the language of the prophecy. But like I said, this is a topic of debate, and one that we will look at in much greater depth when we get to the full rabbinic analysis of these texts. But for you who revere my name, a son of victory shall rise to bring healing. You shall go forth and stamp like stall-fed calves, and you shall trample the wicked to a pulp, for they shall be dust beneath your feet on the day that I am preparing, said God of hosts. All right, very triumphalist, very much an idea of overcoming the wicked, of defeating them. Sounds a bit like battle. It also sounds a bit more like a metaphor of this cow coming out of the stall and frolicking in the field and well, trampling everything, but really exerting its fullness of life. How that plays out, well, we'll see when we discuss it in more detail later. Be mindful of the teaching of my servant Moses, the Torah itself, whom I charged at Horeb, that's another term for Mount Sinai, with laws and rules for all Israel. Lo, I will send the prophet Elijah, Eliyahu Hanavi, to you before the coming of the awesome, fearful day of God. He shall reconcile parents with children and children with their parents, so that when I come, I do not strike the whole land with utter destruction. All right, this end portion here is, of course, very famous because from it, we receive an idea that Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet, will be a precursor for the coming of this end of days time, and will be seen also as the coming of the Messiah. So why Eliyahu Hanavi? Well, primarily because he never officially died on screen. Elijah's end of service to God is punctuated by his departure from this world in a fiery chariot, not the normal way that a person will go into their next stage of life, not the way we normally die. And so this leaves an open ellipse at the end of his life. And here with Malachi and then with rabbinic tradition, that allows Elijah to be this transitory figure that is capable of returning and coming back to do good. Now, why Elijah in particular would be focused on when there are other prophets as well that we don't all see, maybe not with such a dramatic exit, but we don't all see when they die. Jeremiah, for example, it's not 100% clear when and where he dies. But Elijah himself was known for being passionate. Elijah was also somebody who was known for thinking that the Jewish people were dead, that everybody had given up, especially the northern kingdom of Israel. And so it is important for him, like us, to recognize that that is not true, that the Jewish people are still here, and indeed humanity as a whole is prepared to come back to God. What we need is guidance. What we need is a moment of wakefulness so that we can move in that direction. And Elijah is seen as being a very fitting person, an ardent supporter of God, but also somebody who needs to see the lesson that indeed we are prepared as people to come towards God. And we also get the idea here, therefore, that the first half of this section, which talks about the struggle, the war, the fighting, is not coming to just punish people randomly. That Eliyahu Hanavi apparently is going to be here for some period to teach reconciliation so that there is less conflict between the different parts of society and between individuals. Well, that would kind of mean then that anybody who was still fighting in that day, at the top of the paragraph, the burning oven day, would have been somebody that had already received that full message, had accepted that message, had understood what Elijah was doing, had seen the benefits that were accruing to humanity as individuals as well as collectively, and had rejected it, meaning that this would be a very full-throated rejection of everything that is good, not out of confusion, not out of desperation because they feel that they are doing what is necessary to survive. This would be somebody who, if you gave them anything they needed, everything they wanted, and made sure they were perfectly happy and safe and secure, would still choose to go and attack their neighbor without any justification other than they want to. And this, of course, can make our understanding of that fight, that war that Malachi is referring to, a little bit more understandable. Because after all, if it's a war simply between those who believe and those who don't, it seems a little, well, jihadist. It seems a little crusady. And as Jews, we're not a big fan of that kind of idea. On the other hand, if it is a struggle between the vast majority of humanity who have now seen the right way to live and the very tiny minority who have seen the right way to live too and reject it, then it's a little bit more understandable of why the conflict would be carried out and why the enemies in that war would be described in such pejorative terms. But if you want to see more about that potential fight, we need to take a look at Yechezkel, at Ezekiel. Ezekiel describes a great war, often described as Gog and Magog, better understood as Gog from Magog. And we're going to take a look at his two primary chapters dealing with this, as it is one of the most extensive descriptions of a conflict that would come at the end of days. I will warn you, like everything that Ezekiel writes, it is a step even more difficult to understand than even the writings of the other prophets, who are also not always 100% transparent in the way that a modern reader is hoping for. So, whatever you think through your initial read, put it on pause, allow yourself to read it again, consider it from another angle, allow yourself to hear the different commentaries, some of which I'll bring, some of which you might find on your own, and of course, some of which we will look at together when we go through this with more rabbinic guidance. The word of God came to me. O mortal, turn your face toward Gog of the land of Magog, the prince of Meshech and Tubal. Prophesy against him and say. All right, so first of all, we have a question of identification. Who is this Gog? Where is Magog? And what is Ezekiel doing here? Well, we don't know. That is to say, there is no land in the ancient text called Magog. There is no ruler in the ancient text called Gog. And therefore, we cannot locate this on the map. Now, on the one hand, that's a little disappointing because it'd be nice to know where this focus of an enemy is going to come from. On the other hand, it is very disappointing because it means that every two-bit pundit can claim that they have identified the true location of Gog, that they know the true identity of Gog, that they know who and where and when all of this is going to start and how it'll play out. And because the text itself and our ancient sources can't contradict it, because there is no evidence one way or the other, it means that it's much harder to tell them they're wrong, other than to just say you're making it up. But it turns out some people are very happy to make things up and others are very happy to buy it because it might satisfy whatever wish it is. So oftentimes Gog will be used as a label for the enemy of the day. Whomever the current bad guy is, whomever the current boogeyman is, for whichever group is pointing to these chapters, will get identified as Gog. It's sloppy thinking, it is terribly harmful, and it is not the way that we are meant to interpret our text. We don't just say, I don't like you, and since God doesn't like Gog, God surely must not like who I like or who I don't like, therefore you must be God. That kind of thinking is incredibly corrosive to allowing the text to guide us rather than using the text as some rolled up newspaper to swat our enemies as though we didn't need to actually look at it, but could just use it as a tool. So, as you can tell, I'm not a big fan of people trying to find identities here in Gog and Magog. So for the moment, we are going to read this as a hypothetical. You're not going to be like the medieval cartographers who tried to pin Gog somewhere in the uncharted regions of Asia. Literally, go back to the old maps, they would pencil it in just because they knew it had to be somewhere, and they couldn't imagine making a map without it because that would contradict the Bible. Never once thinking that, well, I don't know, maybe Gog could be a future place. Maybe Gog was a future concept. We will, for the moment, take it as being an unexplained hypothetical and person, and whether it is meant to be taken literally or whether it is meant to be taken metaphorically, we will leave for another discussion. But in its own context, what is said? Prophesy against him, against Gog, and say, Thus said the sovereign God, Lo, I am coming to deal with you, O Gog, chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. I will turn you around and put hooks in your jaws and lead you out with all your armies, horses, and riders, all of them clothed in splendor, a vast assembly of them with bucklers and shields, wielding swords. Among them shall be Persia, Cush, and Put, everyone with a shield and helmet. Gomer and all its cohorts, Beit Togarma in the remotest parts of the north and all its cohorts, the many peoples with you. Be ready, prepare yourselves, you and all the battalions mustered about you, and hold yourself in reserve for them. Okay, so to get a handle on this, we have to realize that in many other passages, both in Ezekiel and other prophets, we see prophetic statements of God manipulating, orchestrating, guiding the bad rulers of the world to do things that will lead to a better outcome. So when we have Nebuchadnezzar destroy Jerusalem, when we have Sennacherib destroy the northern kingdom of Israel, the text doesn't say they just woke up one day and decided to do it because they're just that bad. The text describes their coming and the damage they do as being connected to the fulfillment of God's prophecies against the Israelites and Judeans. That they had been warned that if they don't return to God, if they don't live properly according to God's laws, that eventually they will be dealt with harshly, and these instruments are then used as the implements for that discipline. Now, that does not necessarily mean that God is mind controlling them. That doesn't mean that God is manipulating them in a taking away free will kind of way. Instead, what many commentators will point out is just like with the story of Pharaoh and God's hardening of his heart, God will simply stiffen their resolve to do what they wish to do. That Nebuchadnezzar wished to conquer, Sennacherib wished to expand his empire, and God allowed that to happen, allowed them to be resolved in doing so, because the Jewish people didn't deserve more protection at that particular time, and thus they moved in that way. Likewise here with this future prophecy of Gog, when God is putting hooks in his mouth, it means that God is steering him like a bit for a horse, that the animal is being dragged and pointed in the right direction, and the right direction here is going to be war with Israel. And this war is going to involve people from all over. Again, people who wish to point to this and try to claim they know who it's talking about will often focus on one part or another, Persia or Cush, both of which are real countries that we know firmly what their identities were in the antiquity, Persia being still what we would call Persia or Iran, and Cush being Ethiopia, or the areas around Ethiopia. So people will love to say, see, the modern Iranian regime, that clearly must be Gog. That doesn't make any sense because obviously Gog here is having an army that is comprised of these people, not that is driven by any one of those that are listed. So to say that Gog must be Iran because this prophecy mentions Persia is extremely fallacious. So don't try and identify, allow the story to unfold without worrying about who, what, where, and when. Just what is the story trying to teach us? Well, this large group, this assembly of people, cross-multicultural, which was normal for empires in the ancient world, are going to be coming, and it's going to be because God is arranging the situation to make this able to happen. So what's going to happen? After a long time, you shall be summoned. In the distant future, you shall march against the land of people restored from the sword, gathered from the midst of many people, against the mountains of Israel, which have long lain desolate, a people liberated from the nations, and now all dwelling secure. So Gog is the you in this section, and Gog and his armies are going to be gathered, and they're going to be taken to march against Israel. Now note the some information about timing here is this will be an Israel that has been restored. that the people of Israel will have been gathered from the diaspora, from the exile, being scattered in the midst of other peoples. So they are being gathered together. They are reestablished in the land of Israel. They are liberated and dwelling secure. And then Gog and Gog's army is coming down. All right, so again, don't try and put any dates to this. Don't try and figure out if that means it's going to be 2026 or 2027. But just for the moment, allow that non-dated timeline to be in your mind. That this will be at some point after a return from exile, after a return from the diaspora, the dispersion of the Jewish people, and during a time of security for the land of Israel. Okay, at that time, you, Gog, shall advance, coming like a storm. You shall be like a cloud covering the earth, you and all your cohorts, the many peoples with you. Big army, and you're going to be coming. Thus said the sovereign God, on that day, there's our favorite phrase, a thought will occur to you, and you will conceive a wicked design. Again, very similar to the dealing of Pharaoh. You will say, I will invade a land of open towns. I will fall upon a tranquil people living secure, all of them living in unwalled towns and lacking bars and gates, in order to take spoil and seize plunder, to turn your hand against repopulated wastes, and against a people gathered from among the nations, acquiring livestock and possessions, living at the center of the earth. Okay, so notice the description of what is the wicked thought that Gog is going to have. Well, he's going to look at Israel, and Israel is going to be defenseless. Why is it defenseless? Because it is at peace. Nobody felt the need to build walls around their towns. No one felt the need to have gates that were barred. It was an open country because everybody was living at peace. They were dwelling secure. They had repopulated the wastes. They had been regathered. They were simply being prosperous and peaceful. And Gog is saying, that's what I want to take. That rapacious attitude is at the core of his ideology, is at the core of his motivation for his decision making. And that, as you can tell, is what God is describing as being a wicked idea. To see someone at peace and to think, I can take something from them because they're helpless. That is the crux of the attitude that makes Gog the enemy of Israel, is to imagine the ability to enrich yourself by despoiling someone else who is at peace. Onward, Sheba and Dedan and the merchants and all the magnates of Tarshish will say to you, have you come to take spoil? Is it to seize plunder that you assembled your hordes, to carry off silver and gold, to make off with livestock and goods, to gather an immense booty? So other people from around the ancient world, from the borders of their known world, are surprised. They are shocked that this is what you're doing. Therefore prophesy, O mortal, and say to Gog, thus said the sovereign God, surely on that day when my people Israel are living secure, you will take note, and you will come from your home in the farthest north, you and many peoples with you, all of them mounted on horses, a vast horde, a mighty army, and you will advance upon my people Israel like a cloud covering the earth. This shall happen on that distant day. I will bring you to my land, that the nations may know me when, before their eyes, I manifest my holiness through you, O Gog. Okay, so Gog gets this idea. Gog is swooping down. They are coming across this peaceful, safe land of Israel, and God is allowing this to happen because through this incident, God is going to reveal something to the world. Ezekiel continues. Thus said the sovereign God, you are the one I spoke of in ancient days through my servants, the prophets of Israel, who prophesied for years in those days that I would bring you against them. On that day, when Gog sets foot on the soil of Israel, declares the sovereign God, my raging anger shall flare up, for I have decreed in my indignation and my blazing wrath, on that day a terrible earthquake shall befall the land of Israel. Let's pause before we get to the full extent of this, but so far what we have is an understanding, a self-awareness of the prophet Ezekiel, that other prophets too have talked about conflict and war. Indeed, we've seen some of those references already, and we'll see more before we're done with this course. And that this is talking about Gog. This is talking about this war with this entity, whomever this happens to be, or whoever this happens to be. And when this happens, God is not going to allow it to be a victory by Gog. That when this happens, God will fight against Gog. And I know that in English that's hard to say. God will fight against the forces of Gog. And how is this going to happen? What will this look like? Well, this is where Ezekiel continues. On that day, a terrible earthquake shall befall the land of Israel. Don't try and find the date. The fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the beasts of the field, all creeping things that move on the ground, and every human being on earth shall quake before me. Mountains shall be overthrown, cliffs shall topple, and every wall shall crumble to the ground. I will then summon the sword against him throughout my mountains, declares the sovereign God, and every man's sword shall be turned against his kin. I will punish him with pestilence and with bloodshed. I will pour torrential rain, hailstones, and sulphurous fire upon him and his hordes, and many peoples with him. Thus will I manifest my greatness and my holiness, and make myself known in the sight of many nations, and they shall know that I am God. So this conflict is going to involve not just human struggle, the typical trappings of war, but will also involve an unleashing of natural disasters that will show that any victory over Gog is not merely a victory that comes because of good military preparation, but can only be ascribed to the interaction, the involvement of God in ensuring that the forces of Gog lose. Now, why is that important? Well, like we saw when we looked in Isaiah, the whole point is ultimately that the ravenous wolf and the innocent animals of prey will live together, that the wolf will not prey upon them anymore. Gog is here used as the ultimate paradigm of ravenous wolf, of lion, of leopard, of all the animals that biblically in the poetry setting are described as attacking in gratuitous ways. Gog is not attacking out of self-defense. Gog is not attacking for some casus belli, some actual reason for war that would be considered legitimate by anyone. They are attacking purely for plunder, purely for personal enrichment. And that is the anathema of God's view of how nations and indeed individuals should be living. As such, God needs to make sure that when Gog loses, that everybody understands that God is opposed to that type of attitude, because it's not just about stopping one army. It is about ensuring that the entire world truly understands that the motivation of that army is antithetical to all of God's will for this world. So this battle is not just an important military victory. This battle is an important theological demonstration of what God wishes for the world. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to chapter 39. And yes, there's a lot of Ezekiel here, but since often much of this is misquoted or quoted out of context, I felt it important to make sure you were familiar with all of it. And you, O mortal, prophesy against Gog and say, thus said the sovereign God, I am going to deal with you, O Gog, chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. I will turn you around and drive you on, and I will take you from the far north and lead you toward the mountains of Israel. A restatement of the basic idea that we have seen in chapter 38. I will strike your bow from your left hand, and I will loosen the arrow from your right hand. I'm making you weak. Your military ability is going to fail. You shall fall on the mountains of Israel, you and all your battalions and the peoples with you, and I will give you as food to carrion birds of every sort, and to the beasts of the field as you lie in the open field. They're going to die. And when they die, they will simply fall in the places they fall, and they will rot and be eaten by the animals, the wild animals. Now, in almost every culture, this is considered to be the absolute worst way for a person to die. that when a person dies, they are meant to be properly buried, properly honored, properly respected. Each culture may have their own way of doing this, but almost universally, humanity is not a fan of simply allowing people to lie where they fall and be unburied. This was one of the ideas behind the Greek play Antigone. We know from archaeology that the earliest signs of humanity showed that they were trying to bury their dead as well. Even Neanderthals have exhibited this type of behavior. So the idea that they would be dead and unburied is a startling and horrible curse to befall them for the evil that they are trying to perpetrate. And I will send a fire against Magog and those who dwell secure in the coastlands, and they shall know that I am God. So Magog itself will also be harmed, not only its army. Now, mostly we've been talking about Gog, but now it switches its focus to the people of Israel in much more detail. I will make my holy name known among my people Israel, and never again will I let my holy name be profaned. And the nations shall know that I, God, am holy in Israel. So this is hand in hand with a restoration of our connection with God. Again, don't try and timeline this. Don't try and ask, well, which exactly comes first? And were we secure without being connected to God? Were we profaning God's name, but we'd come back from the exile? For the moment, try to leave those details of the timeline to one side. Understand that wherever we were prior to the war with Gog, there will be a intensification and an improvement of our relationship with God and of God's recognized greatness in both our country as well as the world. Excuse me. Turns out talking uninterrupted for 40 minutes can take its toll. Then the inhabitants of the cities, it has come, it has happened, declares the sovereign God. This is that day that I decreed. Again, referring to our day. I hope you've all got that now locked away in your memory. We will see it again. Then the inhabitants of the cities of Israel will go out and make fires and feed them with the weapons, shields and bucklers, bows and arrows, clubs and spears. They shall use them as fuel for 7 years. All right, what are we talking about? Well, we're talking about a cleanup effort, that all of the weapon paraphernalia will be just sitting there in the battlefields, and there will be enough of it because of the size of the battle that people will be able to keep finding bows, arrows, and shields and bucklers, other wooden implements, and use them as firewood because there is just that much, that plentiful. They will not gather firewood in the fields or cut any in the forests, but will use the weapons as fuel for their fires. Right, so this is a statement of how total the destruction of their army, and of course how large the army was, that Israel wouldn't need any firewood for 7 years because of all of the debris that was left over. They will despoil those who despoiled them and plunder those who plundered them. So Gog came with the idea of taking plunder, but in the end, because of their destruction in battle, the Israelites will take their implements and that will enrich them. And so at the end of the day, Israel is materially better off for having gone through this. On that day, I will assign to Gog a burial site there in Israel. Where we talked about being unburied, well, we're going to take care of that. The valley of the travelers, east of the sea. It shall block the path of travelers, for there Gog and all his multitude will be buried. It shall be called the valley of Gog's multitude. The house of Israel shall spend 7 months burying them, in order to purify the land. All the people of the land shall bury them. Okay. To understand this, you have to understand, first is what I said about the idea of being unburied as being a horrible fate, but also that in Judaism, a dead body is a source of ritual impurity, what we call tum'ah. It can make somebody tameh. So being ritually impure means that for certain temple activities, a person is not able to participate until they have gone through a purification process. In particular, the process of the red heifer. So this is trying to say that since there will be bodies everywhere, we, for ourselves, need to also bury them. It's not purely that we are showing respect to the fallen. We are also making sure that we are not going to constantly and inadvertently come across the remains of the dead in a way that will cause ritual impurity for us as well. So there is going to be a burial, and it will take 7 months to go around the country to find the bodies that had not been buried, to gather them together, and to ensure that they can all be buried together in this special valley place. And in that way, the land will be purified. Now we will not have these random bones that could be a source of ritual impurity. The day I manifest my glory shall bring renown to them, declares the sovereign God, and they shall appoint members of a corps to traverse the land and bury any invaders who remain above ground, in order to purify it. The search shall go on for a period of 7 months. And those who traverse the country make their rounds, as those who traverse the country make their rounds, any one of them who sees a human bone shall erect a marker beside it, until the buriers have interred them in the valley of Gog's multitude. There shall also be a city named Multitude, and thus the land shall be purified. So just anybody walking around, if they see a human remain, they would put a marker out, and the people who were assigned to the task would come, they'd see the marker, they would gather the remains, and they would bury them in the valley of Gog's multitude. And indeed, they would even set up a city in that area that would be called Multitude. All right. Now, on its own, we've got a perfectly self-contained story. That is to say, if somebody wanted to put together a movie of what this would look like from the point of view of somebody in Ezekiel's time, it would not be hard to script this. You would have this country Magog, and there would be a leader Gog, and he would be out for plunder, and he would gather up people from all over that part of the world, and they would ride out on their horses, and they would come and attack, and then there would be this incredible battle, and there would be natural disasters befalling them, and it would go on, and then they'd all be destroyed, and then the people would be gathering and burning and burying and all of that stuff. No problem. But if we try to apply this as a future activity, well, immediately we have to get into interpretation. Right? Nobody's fighting with shield and buckler. Nobody is fighting with club and spear. Nobody is looking for firewood from the remains of wooden implements used for war. Immediately, even those who claim, I always read the Bible literally, are going to say, oh, we have to interpret this. And indeed, some of the interpretations can be quite creative. One of my favorite and misunderstanding of physics was the idea that in this war there would be nuclear materials, and that's what would be used as burning. We would make reactors out of the material left over from the nuclear elements. And it's like, and then they say, and that's what they meant by purify. These are people with Geiger counters going around to gather the radioactive remains. And you know, as creativity goes, it's pretty good. And that also would be a wonderful dystopian future movie. As an actual reading of the text, doesn't really work for me. And at this point, you're basically just saying there's going to be a war. Let me describe it however I feel like. And you're not really drawing from the text, but you're drawing from your contemporary fears of what kind of things make you scared. Now, in that respect, it does at least guide us in the way that Ezekiel wanted us to be guided. When people thought of spears and swords and bows and arrows, they weren't thought of in our, unfortunately, too often modern romanticization or nostalgic idea. People didn't think of these as being cool and neat and the kind of thing that, you know, well, wouldn't it be neat to have a sword? No, swords were symbols of death. And for the vast majority of humanity, the other guy having a sword meant you had to either give up everything, leave everything, or die. And so these were not happy symbols. This was not something anybody would want to have around. So by portraying them in their modern interpretations, using the term loosely, as being nuclear or biological or chemical weapons, they are at least tapping into what Ezekiel wanted, that we would look at these things with horror. And what do we feel horror about in the modern world? Well, nuclear, chemical, biological weapons. We look on those much differently than a modern person would think about a sword and shield. And that update of abhorrence of war, it is appropriate, even if their particular interpretation is, well, not very good. So understand that what Ezekiel is describing here was not something that we should be excited for. It's not something that should make us think of glory-filled days of knights and chivalry. This was a horrible situation, and the idea of having to scour the land for human remains was meant to be really disturbing. This was meant to be something very off-putting. So with that in mind, we're going to do just a little bit more. Like I said, we will go back into these discussions in much more detail with rabbinic commentary, but I do want to make sure we get enough time to cover the Tanakh on its own before I give far too much of the, before I begin to corral our understanding according to traditional views. And again, I'll pick from the most common, but also leave plenty of room for our discussion and debate, which is alive and well in the Jewish world. So let's take a look here at Micah 4, and we are going to see a view that is very antithetical to the war motif that we've just come through. Or perhaps it's complementary. I'll let you decide as we go through. But in the end of days it shall come to pass that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established as the top of the mountains, and it shall be exalted above the hills, and people shall flow unto it. And many nations shall go and say, Come ye, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, and to the house of the God of Jacob, and he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths. And yes, if this is sounding similar to Isaiah, like we saw earlier, good, you're paying attention. For out of Zion shall go forth the law, the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. And he shall judge between many peoples, and shall decide concerning mighty nations afar off, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Again, very much on point from our discussion of Isaiah last time. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. But they shall sit, every man under his vine and under his fig tree, and none shall make them afraid, for the mouth of the Lord of hosts has spoken. All right, so sitting under the vine, sitting under a fig tree, this is the image of earthly peace. This is an image of earthly pleasure. You'll note that the food is not being magically produced. This is not paved with gold kind of motif. This is just no more fighting, no more killing, no more, I think your nation has stuff and I want it, plundering. We don't have to do that anymore. That type of conflict is gone, right? Let's just each person be allowed to enjoy what God has given to the world, and no one should be afraid. Now, that idea of salvation, that idea of redemption, is critical and is going to come back again and again. Like I said before, we're still going to have to find a way to reconcile this vision of peace with the vision of conflict. Are they sequential? Are they complementary? Are they two different options? There is more to talk about on that front. But let's take a look at Isaiah 66, the very end of the book of Isaiah. I will set a sign among them and send from them survivors to the nations, to Tarshish, Pul, and Lud, that draw the bow, to Tubal, Yavan, and the distant coasts that have never heard my fame nor beheld my glory. So, worldwide message. They shall declare my glory among these nations, and out of all the nations, said God, they shall bring all your kindred on horses, in chariots and drays, on mules and dromedaries, to Jerusalem, my holy mountain, as an offering to God, just as the Israelites bring an offering in a pure vessel to the house of God. So here we see the nations of the world returning the dispersed, returning those in exile, that there will be a return to the land of Israel, and it will be facilitated by these people from around the world. Now again, timeline, where does this happen? This seems in context in Isaiah to be at the very end of all of this. And yet we saw from Ezekiel that there had already been a return to Israel before the war with Gog. So are there multiple returns? Or was this happening parallel with Gog? Is this happening as what other nations were doing while Gog was doing its thing? Like I said, we should not expect to get an easy answer, and anyone who tells you otherwise is probably selling something. And most importantly, in this first paragraph, and from them, meaning these other non-Jewish nations, likewise, I will take some to be Levitical priests, said God. Now, this is a phrase that is lovely for debate. Are we talking about actually making people from other nations able to serve in the Beit HaMikdash in Jerusalem itself? Or are we saying that they too will have their own priests that will serve like the Levites for them in their own nations, returning back to their own people and allowing them to have their own connection to God in their own way? It is not a slam dunk argument in either direction. It seems like it might be talking about Jerusalem, since that was just mentioned, and that would seem to be implying that they're going to serve in Jerusalem. On the other hand, the whole idea is that God's fame and God's glory is being spread to these other nations. So keeping all of their Levitical priests in our capital doesn't seem like that would serve the other nations all that well. So we'll have to come back to that at some point in the future. And then we get a little bit of more interesting / confusing text. For as the new heaven and the new earth that I will make shall endure by my will, declares God, so shall your seed and your name endure. Jewish people going to continue on forever. Yay! The world continue on forever. Yay! And it is working right now. And new moon after new moon and Sabbath after Sabbath, all flesh shall come to worship me, said God. So everybody is recognizing God and using the metaphors of Shabbat and Rosh Chodesh as those common weekly and monthly occurrences where we would have a spike in our intensity of our celebration of God. This seems to now be shared universally. They shall go out and gaze on the corpses of those who rebelled against me. Their worms shall not die, their fire be quenched. They shall be a horror to all flesh. This last line is so off-putting that when we read this as part of our Haftarah for Rosh Chodesh, we go back and repeat the previous verse, the new heaven, new earth verse, in order to end on a more positive note. And this last line is indeed extremely confusing. Are we implying that the bodies of those who rebelled will not be at peace? But I thought in Ezekiel, we said they were all going to be buried eventually in one collected area. And are we saying that this is somehow like they're actually suffering through this? Are they eternally alive but physically suffering? That doesn't seem to match with what we have seen before. Additionally, is this meant as an educational activity to have this example of these evil people? But I thought this was already a place where everybody knew God and understood God and was come to God. Surely we wouldn't need to keep a perpetual monument, especially if it was causing suffering. Or is this a monument that is just a reminder of saying bad stuff happened? The same way that we have a mass burial in Ezekiel, that there was a place where people would say, this is a place where we buried the wicked, and we remember the wicked, and we are grateful that we are no longer like them, and that the world has found peace. It's not clear from the text just by itself. As I've said many times, and will keep saying, you can't simply read the text and believe that whatever pops into your mind as your first interpretation most certainly must be what it means. That's not the way reading Revelation works. We do not get a free pass that whatever I think it says must be what it says. Instead, we sift, we study, we compare, we contrast, we debate, we discuss, we consider, we reconsider, and we add incrementally to each other's understanding and to the understanding collectively. It's not easy. That's why you signed up for this, and that's what we're going to keep working on. We've got a few more biblical texts to go through, and then we will begin looking at some of the ways that traditional Judaism, through our earliest strata of rabbinic writing, handled these texts and others, and how we come to a basic understanding of at least an outline of what the majority of Jewish tradition believes the end of days will look like. Obviously, on many, many details, we are still going to have debate and discussion. But that outline as a whole is not only going to give us a view for the long term, but will also give us a better idea of what we do short term, of how we live our days here and now, in light of what we believe about this long-term pattern. But it's still going to be a while to get there. It's going to be a hard going. This is never easy, and that is okay. It is worth the time. It is worth the struggle. And I hope that you will come back and continue to struggle with me as we study further next time. Take care, everyone, and be well.